Anastasio Tachito Somoza Debayle was a Nicaraguan politician and officially the 73rd and 76th President of Nicaragua from the 1st of May 1967 to the 1st of May 1972 and from the 1st of December 1974 to the 17th of July 1979. As head of the National Guard, he was de facto ruler of the country from 1967 to 1979. He was the last member of the Somoza family to be president, ending a dynasty that had been in power since 1936. After being overthrown in an insurrection led by the FSLN, he fled Nicaragua and power was ceded to the Junta of National Reconstruction. He was eventually assassinated while in exile in Paraguay. Name. As is customary in most Spanish-speaking countries, he was given both his parents' last names, Somoza being his father's last name and Debayle being his mother's last name. Debayle is of French origin. Early years. Anastasio Somoza Debayle, nicknamed Tachito by his father, was the third child of Anastasio Somoza Garcia and Salvadora Debayle. At the age of 7, he was enrolled at the Instituto Pedagógico La Salle, run by the Christian Brothers. One of his classmates was Pedro Joaquín Chamorro Cardinal, who would grow up to become one of the most prominent opponents of the Somoza dynasty. For the age of 10, Tachito was educated in the United States. He and older brother Luis Somoza Debayle both attended St. Leo College Prep and La Salle Military Academy. He passed the examination for West Point, entered the United States Military Academy on July 3, 1943, and graduated on June 6, 1946. 2 years after his return from West Point, he fathered a daughter, Patricia, who was later sent to a series of schools abroad. Also after his return, he was appointed Chief of Staff of the National Guard by his father, who had previously given many important posts to family members and close personal friends. As commander of the Guard, Somoza was head of the nation's armed forces, effectively the second most powerful man in Nicaragua. On the 10th of December 1950, he and Hope Porter Carrero, an American citizen and his first cousin, were married at the cathedral in Managua by Archbishop José Antonio Lezcano. Over 4,000 guests attended the ceremony. The reception was given by President Anastasio Somoza Garcia in the luxurious and modern Palacio de Comunicaciones. They had 5 children: Anastasio Somoza Porter Carrero, Julio Somoza Porter Carrero, Carolina Somoza Porter Carrero, Carla Somoza Porter Carrero, Roberto Somoza Porter Carrero. Following his father's assassination on the 21st of September 1956, Somoza's elder brother, Luis, took over the presidency. Anastasio had a large hand in the government during this time and saw to it that the presidency was held by politicians loyal to his family from 1963 to 1967. Presidency. On the 1st of May 1967, shortly before the death of his brother, Anastasio Somoza was himself elected president for the first time. While Luis had ruled more gently than his father had, Anastasio was intolerant of opposition of any sort, and his regime soon resembled his father's in all significant respects. When someone suggested educating the workforce, Somoza famously replied, "I don't want an educated population, I want oxen." His term in office was due to end in May 1972, due to a law which disallowed immediate re-election. However, prior to that, Somoza worked out an agreement allowing him to stand for re-election in 1974. He would be replaced as president by a 3-man junta consisting of 2 liberals and 1 conservative while he retained control of the national National Guard. Somoza and his triumvirate drew up a new constitution that was ratified by the triumvirate and the cabinet on April 3, 1971. He then stepped down as president on May 1, 1972. However, as head of the National Guard, he remained the de facto ruler of the country. On the 23rd of December 1972, an earthquake struck the nation's capital, Managua, killing about 5,000 people and virtually destroying the city. Martial law was declared, making Somoza the country's ruler in name as well as in fact once again. He then took over effective control as head of the National Emergency Committee. He reportedly embezzled many of the funds sent from across the world to help rebuild Managua. Indeed, some parts of Managua have never been rebuilt or restored, including the National Cathedral. Roberto Clemente, whose ill-fated trip to Managua was intended to safeguard earthquake supplies, died in a plane crash while traveling to Nicaragua. Somoza also allegedly was selling Nicaraguan blood plasma abroad at the time of the earthquake, when medical supplies, including blood products, were desperately in short supply. Somoza was re-elected president in the 1974 election. By this time, the Catholic Church had begun to speak against his government. By the late 1970s, human rights groups were condemning the record of the Somoza government, while support for the Sandinistas was growing inside and outside the country. In July 1977, Somoza had a heart attack and went to the U.S. to recuperate. In 1975, Somoza Debayle launched a campaign to crush the Sandinistas. Individuals suspected of supporting the front were targeted. The front, named after Augusto C. Acute Sar Sandino, began its guerrilla war against the Somozas in 1963 and was funded by the Soviet Union and Cuba under Fidel Castro. Support for the Sandinistas ballooned after the earthquake, especially when U.S. President Jimmy Carter withdrew American support for the regime for human rights reasons. At this point, the opposition to the Somozas included not only Sandinistas but other prominent figures such as Pedro Chamorro. Israel was the last supplier of weapons to the Somoza regime, because during the Israeli War of Independence in 1948, Somoza's father provided substantial financial support for Israel. Carter forced the Israeli government to call back a ship carrying weapons vital to the survival of the Somoza regime. Because of his status, most of his family members were forced to flee into Honduras, Guatemala, and the United States. It is uncertain where the remaining Somozas live, given the fact that they changed the names to protect their own lives. On July 17, 1979, Somoza resigned the presidency and fled to Miami in a converted Curtiss C-46. He took with him the caskets of his father and brother and much of Nicaragua's national treasure, leaving the country with a $1.6 billion foreign debt, the highest in Central America. After Somoza had fled, the Sandinistas found less than $2 million in the national treasury. Somoza was denied entry to the U.S. by President Carter. He later took refuge in Paraguay, then under the dictatorship of Alfredo Stroessner. He bought a ranch and a gated house at Avenida de España No. 433 in Asunción. Somoza's regime lasted only another day, when the Sandinistas captured Managua. Assassination. Somoza was assassinated near his exile home on September 17, 1980. He was 54 years old. Somoza Debayle was ambushed by a 7-person Sandinista commando team. This was known as Operation Reptile. The Sandinista team had 2 Soviet-made machine guns, 2 AK-47 assault rifles, 2 automatic pistols, and an RPG-7 rocket launcher with 4 anti-tank grenades and 2 rockets. The leader was Argentinian Marxist revolutionary Enrique Gorriarán Melo, an exegete Revolucionario del Pueblo member. One of the team members said, "We cannot tolerate the existence of millionaire playboys while thousands of Latin Americans are dying of hunger. We are perfectly willing to give up our lives for this cause." For over 6 months the Sandinista assassins researched and planned their assault. The team meticulously studied Somoza's movements with a team member who was staked out at a newspaper kiosk near the estate. They waited in ambush for Somoza in Avenida España. Somoza was often driven about the city in a presumed unarmored Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan. Team member Oswaldo, disguised as a paper boy, watched Somoza exit the estate and signaled when he was leaving at 10:10 a.m. Once in position, Hugo Urzan readied the RPG-7. He tried to fire an anti-tank rocket at the car, but the RPG-7 misfired. Ramon then gunned down the chauffeur while Urzan quickly reloaded the RPG with a new rocket. The second rocket made a direct hit on the sedan. Accounts mentioned that the Mercedes engine kept on running even after the rocket explosion. Previously, the commando team had considered the possibility that Somoza's vehicle might indeed be equipped with forward-paneled armor. This would most likely deflect the rocket projectile upwards if hit from a frontal stance. The Sandinista team decided to engage with a lateral attack which would rule out any projectile deflection. Somoza was killed instantly and charred with the other 2 passengers in the car. His financial advisor, Colombian citizen Jou Baitana, and his new driver Ce Acute Sar Gallardo. Later media reports in Paraguay stated that Somoza's body was so unrecognizable that forensics had to identify him through his feet. Of the 7 assassins, 6 escaped. Urzan was later captured because of his blonde beard and was executed. Somoza was buried in Miami at Woodlawn Park Cemetery and Mausoleum. A few months before Somoza's death, his memoirs, Nicaragua Betrayed, were published. In them he blamed the Carter administration for his downfall. His son, Anastasio Somoza Portocarrero, went into exile in Guatemala. Former National Intelligence Officer for Latin America and Cuba expert Professor Brian Lattel argues in his book After Fidel, that the plan to assassinate Somoza was devised in Havana with direct input from Fidel Castro. According to him, the Sandinistas had won power in July 1979 with the assistance of massive, covert Cuban military aid. Along with his brother Raúl Castro, the two masterminded a complex multinational covert action to provide the Sandinistas with huge quantities of modern armaments. Cuban intelligence and paramilitary advisors poured into Nicaragua along with the equipment. Lattel states that the evidence indicated that the assassination operation was similar to other assassination operations Cuban intelligence had been involved in, and that Somoza was a longtime nemesis of Castro after he provided critical support to the U.S. in preparing for the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in April 1961. George Massati, former Argentine guerrilla working with Cuban intelligence services, describes the Somoza assassination and Cuba's direct role in the planning in his autobiographical book In the Pirate's Den. His funeral became an occasion for wealthy Nicaraguan and Cuban exiles in South Florida to gather and protest the left-wing governments of Nicaragua, under the FSLN, and Cuba under Castro. Castro. However, other accounts note that this group in Miami was also relieved at Somoza's death because the newly founded Contra Army, which consisted of many ex-members of Somoza's National Guard, would have to give the impression of having no relation to the old Somoza regime, for purposes of public relations and world opinion. In 1979, the Brazilian newspaper Gazeta Mercantil estimated that the Somoza family's fortune amounted to between $2 billion and $4 billion, with its head, Anastasio Somoza Debayle, owning $1 billion. In popular culture, his assassination was reported by the famous tabloid headline, "Somoza slain by bazooka." Somoza was the subject of the 1983 film Last Plane Out, where he was portrayed by actor Lloyd Battista. The film chronicles journalist Jack Cox's journey to Nicaragua when Somoza was battling insurgents. He also was depicted in another 1983 film, the Hollywood production Under Fire, set during the 1979 Nicaraguan Revolution, this time being portrayed by actor René Enriquez. Bibliography: Alegria, Clarabelle, and Flakol. Darwin J. Death of Somoza. Curbstone Press, 1996. Berman, Carl. Under the Big Stick, Nicaragua and the United States since 1848. South End Press, 1986. Booth, John A. The End and the Beginning, The Nicaraguan Revolution. Westview Press, 1985. Booth, John A. and Thomas W. Walker. Understanding Central America. Westview Press, 1999. Christian, Shirley. Nicaragua, Revolution in the Family. Vintage, 1986. Crawley, Eduardo. Dictators Never Die, Nicaragua and the Somoza Dynasty. Palgrave Macmillan, 1979. Diedrich, Bernard. Somoza and the Legacy of U.S. Involvement in Central America. Marquina Publishers, 2007. Dillon, Sam. Commandos, the CIA and Nicaragua's Contra-Rebels. Henry Holt Namco, 1992. Kinzer, Stephen. Blood of Brothers, Life and War in Nicaragua. David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, 2007. Lake, Anthony. Somoza Falling, A Case Study of Washington at Work. University of Massachusetts Press, 1990. Lycan, Robert S. and Barry M. Rubin. The Central American Crisis Reader. Summit Books, 1987. Merrill, Tim. Nicaragua, A Country Study. Federal Research Division, Library of Congress, 1995. Millett, Richard. Guardians of the Dynasty. Orbis Books, 1977. Norsworthy, Kent and Tom Barry. Nicaragua, A Country Guide. Interhemispheric Education Resource Center, 1990. Pastor, Robert A. Condemned to Repetition. The United States and Nicaragua. Princeton University Press, 1987. Persons, David E. A History of the Nicaraguan Contras. Stephen F. Austin State University, 1988. Pezzulo, Lawrence and Ralph Pezzulo. At the Fall of Somoza. University of Pittsburgh Press, 1994. Reese, John. Ally Betrayed. Nicaragua. West End Goals, 1980. Somoza, Anastasio. Nicaragua Betrayed. Western Islands, 1980. Towell, Larry. Somoza's Last Stand. Testimonies from Nicaragua. Red Sea Press, 1990. Walker, Thomas W. Nicaragua, Living in the Shadow of the Eagle. Westview Press, 2003. Zimmerman, Matilda. Sandinista, Carlos Fonseca and the Nicaraguan Revolution. Duke University Press, 2001.